Well, hello everyone. This is the second part of Shemini, and that means the 8th day. We've already covered an hour, and you would see that on Facebook and YouTube. Should you decide to avail yourself to it, it would be good to do so because it'll give you insight before you come to this section. But we're going to just move on and quickly finish the end of chapter 9 before we jump into chapter 10 quickly. And we're just going to start with the fire, the divine fire. And as I said to the Zoom room team that were here, it's actually been an area that I've been fascinated with fire, and I feel like there's more study I need to do on it. But as you know, the fire was already going because they had already burnt offerings and sacrifices prior to the 8th day in the 7th day inauguration process. Plus also we see there were sacrifices occurring actually on the 8th day. And there's a couple of trains of thought here. So I'm going to throw them out there and, you can decide or mull over it and see what you think. But one rabbi actually mentioned that Moses was dressed in white linen, was able to conduct the priestly duties, that is in the 7-day inauguration period, and possible he was represented, as we know, because he is the order of Melchizedek. And therefore Moses was able to light the fire in the 7th-day inauguration process period because at that time he was representing the heavenly tabernacle and not the earthly one, as he was neither a son of Aaron or wearing the correct garments. Therefore his privilege had to supersede the earthly privilege, which just shows you the whole supernaturalness of this, doesn't it? And the other thought which I found, again, I actually found this was a really good read on Chabad because they broke it down a little bit more. It said, like I said, it was the fire was already lit, and that is Aaron and the priests already were sacrificing the early specified offerings. But we now see that this divine fire came out before the Lord in verse 24, the continual fire, which was man-made and was for the preparation in the sanctuary for the fire. And then, of course, it descended from heaven. So you see in the Talmud in Yoma 21b, although fire comes down from heaven, it is a commandment also for man to bring fire. It was the awakening from below that brought an answering response from God, but it brought the response only when the fire was perfect and without defect. The awakening, obviously, is what they call it. So what do you think this awakening was? Well, we know the sanctuary and the vessels were consecrated and set apart. Then we see the sacrifices were being performed during the 7 days, but it wasn't until the 8th day when the fire was perfected through the offerings. So the fire came forth from God, and that we see from verse 24. And so what was this fire from heaven, and why did it require the perfection of the earthly fire? Well, man is a created being. He is infinite, and there are limits to what he can achieve on his own. He acts bounded by time. To become eternal, something divine must intervene. And isn't it beautiful? Doesn't it actually bring back the whole 8th day concept? Yeah. So the 7 days were a week, the measure of earthly time. The 8th was the day beyond human time, as we know, the number which signifies eternity. And hence it was that day of the heavenly fire, which was the response of the infinite God. So that's quite beautiful. I think that actually makes, to me, it makes sense, you know, this divine perfection coming down of which everyone could see. And where else did we see this divine fire? Well, we see it appear in the announcement of the birth, actually, of Samson in Judges 13. And I went and read Samson again, and I just fell in love reading that again. And it was just like, yep, I get this. And there's so many bits and pieces that are in there. You know, Samson's mum had to abstain from drinking wine, which you would anyway from having with children and that, but because he kept a Nazirite vow. I'm sidetracking here, but just these really interesting concepts coming out that I'm sure if we all read these things again, we'll understand so much better. We also see the fire when Solomon dedicated the first temple in 2 Chronicles 7. And we see it also again, Elijah challenging the prophets at Baal on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18. And of course, we see in Acts 2, the Holy Spirit coming upon them. So just to finish up this chapter, we obviously we need to understand that this amazing 8th day was not, what this day was about. And you can imagine the sovereignty and the intensity of this day, and this first worship service. It shows us about drawing near to him, to worship him. They desired and anticipated a close encounter with God. And of course, they did receive blessings from Moses and Aaron, but they had this amazing opportunity to draw closer to God. So what can we learn for this? Well, I know for me, like I said, going through to Leviticus has just opened my eyes. And, for me, I personally, when I was in my personal worship time, saw a picture of myself, arms opened up, and there was this smoke coming from my body, and it resembled that olah, that soothing fragrance. And he desires for us, obviously, to be holy. And so my attitude for me personally, coming to church, coming into prayer, worship, whatever, has obviously taken a bigger and broader understanding after reading this. So, and Aaron and his sons had been given this holy role of being high priests and priests before the Lord. And Jesus is our high priest. And you and I are called to be priests, to be holy before him. We see that written in Revelations 1:5-6. So every time we come together as a community, we need to expect the glory of the Lord to appear just like they did. And I think, we need to have that level of expectation and come to church prepared for that and have a prepared heart. And I liken it to someone in a sports team. They do their part, and then when they come together as a team, like soccer, they're prepared for that event. And individually, we can have our connection with God in our prayer time. But when we come together corporately, we can expect this. And anyway, so we can keep going on and going forth. But the other thing I just want to flag is that the importance of an intercessor. It was Aaron and his sons here that in the inauguration and entered their role as high priest and priest, that they became intercessors, so to speak, for the people. It was the sacrifices, and they helped and the help of Aaron and his sons that they could draw near to God. And we see that God received the efforts of the people through the help of the priests, that God appeared in their midst. And for us today, obviously, that's Jesus. That's Messiah, our high priest. He came to earth as a man. He was sacrificed for our sin and completed that loop between God and man. And with that, we will move on to chapter 10, and that is Nadav and Avihu. So I'm going to just get, Lynn, do you mind reading Leviticus chapter 10, verses 1-7, please?
Sure. Then Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it, put incense on it, and offered profane fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. So fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. And Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people I must be glorified." So Aaron held his peace. Then Moses called Michael and Elzaphan, the sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, "Come near, carry your brethren from before the sanctuary out of the camp." So they went near and carried them by their tunics out of the camp, as Moses had said. And Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar, his sons, "Do not uncover your heads, nor tear your clothes, lest you die, and wrath come upon all the people. But let your brethren, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning which the Lord has kindled. You shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die, for the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you. And they did according to the word of Moses.
Perfect. Thanks, Lynn. Oh my goodness. So now that we have a perspective on the 8th day and what's been happening, it seems to change gear a bit, doesn't it? Quite significantly. You know, we've just had everything up until this point. Well, it appears to have gone so well, and there's joy and excitement, and you know, they're following what the Lord has asked them to do. And then we see Nadav and Avihu, they got their fire pans, put fire in it, and offered it to the Lord. And again, it's interesting when we're reading the Bible, the rabbis' take on it. There seems to be no set conclusion as to why. I mean, it weighs more heavily with one verse that's actually written in there. But what we do know is that they offered a strange fire before the Lord that we see in verse 10. And I thought it would just be good just to look at a few concepts that the rabbis looked at as to why they think Nadav and Abihu died before the Lord. Like I said, I've only named a few here for the sake of time. So I know Kyle mentioned this the other day, and it's the word hashbat. Maybe someone can say it better than me, but that word, which means both self-confidence and imprudence, which means lacking discretion, wisdom. And the real sin was their imprudent disrespect for their teacher Moses. This is one concept. Apparently, they would contradict him with opinions and interpretations. Another concept why they thought this happened was that they say that Nadav and Abihu were drunk when this event happened. And this is based on the verse that we see a few verses down where it says in Leviticus 10:9, do not drink wine or intoxicating drink. And it goes on from there. So there is a thought that they may have been intoxicated. Though this is a guess, but, you know, this is just a concept that they say. And as we can see, Moses did address it later on. Another thought is wrong place, wrong time. So some commentators, rabbis, see Leviticus 16 as supporting text to say that they entered the Holy of Holies to present their incense. And this chapter opens up with referencing Aaron's sons in regards to this. Bad assumptions, another concept, it is thought that they assumed the other knew what they were doing. I'm sure we've all been in that situation, thinking the other person, if you're in a team situation. And another concept is a really interesting one. They never married. So in Numbers 3:4 mentions they had no sons. So tradition explains that they thought there would be no woman worthy of them. So you must find a woman of God or God will kill you. Yeah, who knows? But anyway, that's just a concept there. But obviously the one that is linked to this, the strongest, obviously, is, of course, the strange fire. And it is clearly outlined in the verses there. So it implies that the coals of the fire they used came from another source and offer incense, even from another source, as well believed, at the wrong time and place in the wrong manner. And they offered, like I said, the unauthorized incense, and they were not commanded to do so. So I think we need to see is that at the chapter 9 ends with the divine fire coming down. So we see this complete difference, don't we? This divine fire coming down, consuming the sacrifices. People were shouting, falling on their faces, just worshiping the Lord. And then we see chapter 10, which, you know, goes straight into, and the rabbis say that it actually followed on the same day, as in on the same day, not the next day, but they say it's on the same day. And we see this same divine fire consume Nadav and Abihu. It was just so much opposite, you know, it's so much opposition there, wasn't it? So contradictory, it seems. And yet what I know it is showing us actually is that God's fire represents God's glory, and it's that same fire and that same God, and his holy fire back then and now is holy. And is what we see here is that Nadav and Abihu failed to respect the the line of holiness. And he clearly outlined this way up, leading up to this in Leviticus, that I'm holy. And of course, they cross that line. Another reminder to us is we don't physically do these sacrifices like they did, but for us now, but God is holy. So in the book of Hebrews in 12:29, it says, for our God is a consuming fire. So like I said, it's the same today, yesterday, and forever. Our God is loving and kind and gracious, but he is also a consuming fire. Does anyone here in the also know where we see something like this happen in the New Testament? It wasn't, they weren't killed by fire, but they were killed.
Yes, those, I can't remember their name now. Was it Sapphira?
Ananias
and Sapphira.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Thank you, Glennis. Yeah, the new covenant, obviously, couple brought an offering to the apostles in Jerusalem, literally before the Lord, and lied to the Holy Spirit about how much money they received for the sale of their property. And so we can see that they were struck dead. And, our God is obviously merciful, patient, and kind and compassionate and slow to anger, but we must not take these qualities for granted. And I think sometimes we can. To truth be told, we're not here to test the Lord. That's not what we're meant to do. We shouldn't treat his holiness carelessly, should we? And I pray for all of us that we have a healthy fear of the Lord, which will keep us on the narrow road that leads to life. And I just want to make a mention at the verse of at the end of verse 3, it says, "But those who come near to me, I must be regarded as holy and sanctified, and before all the people, I must be glorified." So God had to show this is serious, and every direction had to be followed. So he was sanctified by those who were close to him. They couldn't fool around with the holiness of God. And the other interesting point I want to make here is, and Aaron held his peace. This blows me away, actually. He held his peace. In our modern day, we don't always value silence, do we? People, seem to want to talk all the time. And sages say the wisest person in the room is the one who doesn't say much. And there is value in silence, and there is value biblically to not talk incessantly either. And now Aaron could have said a lot here, but he chose to stay silent. And we know there's verses on here, just to name a couple. Proverbs 10:19. Actually, I'll get someone quickly to look that up. Proverbs 10:19. Glennis, can you do that? Proverbs 17:28. Tash, do you mind doing that, darling? And James 1:19. Natasha Rudd, do you mind looking that up? And I'm going to get one of the Belshaw kids to look up Proverbs 21:23. Once you've got it, Glennis, go for it.
Yeah. In the multitude of words, he does not want transgression, but the one who restrains his lips is wise.
Perfect. Thank you. Who was next? Tash?
28.
17:28, darling.
Even a fool, when he holds his peace, is counted as wise. He that shuts his lips is esteemed as a man of understanding.
Nice. Lovely. And Natasha?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Verse, please? Was it
James 1:19.
James 1:19. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know if it was 9 or 19.
That's okay.
My esteemed brothers, that every person must continually be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow in anger.
Lovely. And here we go. Off we go, Belshaws.
Those who are careful about what they say keep themselves out of trouble.
Lovely. Thank you, darling. That's great. Well, as you know, there's heaps of verses about speaking and keeping your tongue, but that's just to name a couple. So let's go on. Leviticus 13:4-7 goes on to talk about Michelle and Eslaphem, the cousins of Nadav and Abihu, and are directed by Moses to carry the bodies out of the camp. So imagine, like, I imagine too much. Maybe I imagine too much. I don't know. But I imagine myself in that situation, having to do this. I think I might have been a little bit fearful, to be quite honest, just seeing what happened. But just the same, they did what they were told. And what's interesting is that you see in Leviticus 13:5, sorry, it says, so they went, 13, I've jumped ahead, haven't I? Sorry, 10. Well, I don't know where I got the 10s all from, but the 13 from. We're in Leviticus 10. Apologies. So when they went near and carried them by their tunics out of the camp, as Moses had said. Notice they say carried them by their tunics out of the camp. I thought they were burnt up.
The tunics weren't consumed.
Pardon?
Their tunics were not consumed.
Yes. Why? I know the holders know this. So do you want to explain maybe why they were not consumed?
Because the fire went through their nostrils and spiritually burnt them, but they physically weren't burnt.
Well done, guys. It's exactly right. And we see that in Rashi. He said that in those of the dead, not in their own garments. This tells us that the garments had not been destroyed by the fire, but their souls alone. Neither their clothing nor bodies showed signs of burning. They had been struck by fire inwardly. There entered into the nostrils something like 2 threads of fire, which burnt them to death. Isn't that interesting? I probably would have read over that verse before had I not zoned in onto carried by their tunics. Well, they're not going to carry their own tunics out, as in the cousins. It's picking them up by their tunics, isn't it? So there is definitely more on this, but we'll leave it there. But that was a really interesting nugget that we found there. So if we look at verses 6 and 7, we see where Moses said to Aaron and to Eleazar and Ithamar his sons, do not uncover your heads nor tear your clothes, lest you die and wrath come upon all the people. But let your brethren, the whole house of Israel, bewail the burning which the Lord has kindled. You shall not go out from the door of the tabernacle of meeting lest you die, for the anointing oil of the Lord is upon you. And they did according to the words of Moses. So again, let's put ourselves in the shoes of Aaron. How do you think you would be feeling? You've just seen well, we know they weren't burnt to a crisp, but they're gone. They're your children. They've gone. I think they're the first borns, weren't they? The first 2 born. So how do you think you would respond? It's challenging, isn't it? And he kept quiet, like I said before. You know, do you think you could continue to serve God when something like this happens? It's the questions you ask. Yeah, Leon.
One of the studies I've been doing, in fact, Aaron and the 4 boys all destined to die at the hand of the Lord, but it was the intercessory prayers of Moses who saved the first two sons, the last 2 sons, and Aaron.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yep. Can you say that again, Leon? I sort of missed half of it, and I just wanted to make sure I cleared that up again. Sorry. In fact, Aaron and his 4 sons were all destined to die because of their part in the golden calf. Yes.
But I think that one of the studies I did, it was to prove that God will accept intercessory prayer where someone else can actually save the life of someone. Because in fact, Moses prayed for the 5 of them, and it was only the 2 eldest. And the reason that those 2 eldest copped it in the neck was that they actually infringed 7 times. There were 7 issues they did not do properly, not just the burning of the incense. That was the death knell. That was the last stroke, really. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, well, it's interesting. Thank you, Leon. Yeah, you're right. And when Leon said like the death sentence were on the son, what he's referring to, when you look up the verses back in, is it Exodus, when it happened, is it Exodus? back in Exodus, or it might be forward in Deuteronomy, but there's a reference to that that Rashi makes about that, where the actual, there is like a kind of like a death sentence put on the sin that he did, which was, we see actually happen through the sons, and particularly the first two elders. But in terms of what they did, I might be wrong, but I felt like the rabbis never really landed on one solid reason other than the fire, but there were all those other reasons that, well, some that I mentioned before, as to why they also committed it. But hey, this is what we talk about. This is what Midrash is all about, isn't it? Having the conversation. So, and I love a good conversation.
Kelly, John here.
Yes.
My reasoning is one of the reasons they possibly carried them out by their tunics. These two sons would have now been classed as unclean. If you touch an unclean body, you are then unclean. And you can't come back into the camp till later that evening or whatever. So they didn't want to touch the bodies.
That's a good point. However, if the fire of God came down, wouldn't it have burnt them to a crisp?
No, we just discussed that didn't happen. The bodies were still intact.
That's right. That's right. So yes, it could be that, but and this is what's so beautiful about this whole 8th day. It's this I would say even in death there is like this supernatural thing going down, wasn't there? It's unbelievable. But yeah, good thought, good concept. Yep. Just going back to what we were saying. Okay, so Moses obviously gave them clear instructions of what they could and could not do. That is putting away your personal feelings until the end of your shift, so to speak, until the end of the day of the 8th day. And so we see here, it says, do not bare your heads. What do you think this means? I can see Glennis talking.
The thoughts in your head, yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting concept. Yeah, I like it. What else? What did other people come up with? It's okay if you haven't. I just thought there might be some thoughts there.
That's part of grieving in Israeli culture, Shiva.
Thanks, Joy.
And tear the garment.
Yeah, absolutely. You got it right. And I think the clue is the next following verses, words after it. Do not tear your garments. But it's interesting. It says, do not bare your head. But when you look up the word bare, it means para, which means actually don't let go, don't let loose. We would often think bare to take off, wouldn't we? You know, don't uncover, don't whatever. It's to be, don't let loose. And so I found that actually quite interesting, because it all comes down to how we understand English, which can often be different to what we understand in the Hebrew. And what he was saying is that they were not to go into the mourning process. And I'm not sure how many of you understand or know about the stages of mourning. But there's an actual process, and also with the priest, there's a limitation on who they can mourn, and usually it's with close family. And it's actually, I can't remember which chapter it is in Leviticus, but it's in Leviticus, and it goes through who they can mourn for, and that will clarify it for you. But let's have a quick look at the mourning process, and this will make sense. So when they say bare your head, bear in mind it says let go, let loose. And so there is the several stages, as I said, of the mourning process. And that is, the first one is Aninut. I think I said it right, Aninut. And that's the pre-burial mourning. This is when the rendering of garments occur as a sign of grief. The clothes are ripped across the heart of your across your heart, like rip, or if it's a relative, it's to the right. I did not know that myself, so that's interesting. And then they go into the stage of Shiva. And I was just saying this to the ladies yesterday, Beth and Coral, that for those that were watching The Chosen, they actually make a reference of it in the first, say, 5 minutes of the movie. And I'm like, I know Shiva, I know what it means, I know what it means, I know what it means. And it actually means the first 7-day period, following the burial process. So the first 3 days are the more intense days of mourning. They don't shave or cut their hair, so they let it grow and let it go. Then you have shloshim. the 30-day mourning period, they continue not to cut or shave their hair. And then the first year, this is observed by the children of the deceased, they continue not to cut or shave their hair. So you can see why Aaron said this. There is a reason. And we know it goes on to talk about in verses 8 to 11. Then the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you. When you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die, it shall be a statute forever through your generations, that you may distinguish between holy and unholy, and between clean and unclean, and that you may teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken to them by the hand of Moses. So obviously it says not to drink or intoxicating wine when you go into the tabernacle, which makes sense. You're there obviously to perform holy, pure duties before the Lord, and it's very clear why that is. And of course you will note that it's a statute forever throughout all your generations. And the word, as we know, because it's been taught before, actually, does anyone remember what that word statute is in Hebrew? It's okay.
Is it mitzvah?
Pardon?
Is it mitzvah?
Well, you're close. That's commandment. But yeah, you're close. So statute is CHOQ. And a statute is a condition of civil enactment from God. So an ordinance, an enactment or a decree, a limit or something prescribed, a task, portion, limit or boundary. So it's to be forever, meaning it continues, it doesn't stop. So you could say it's like drinking and driving. They don't go together, you know. Obviously, the priest can't make clear decisions if he's intoxicated. It just doesn't make sense. And God provides, obviously, the reasons for this in verses 10 and 11. I'm going to probably just fast forward just a little bit. Just give me 1 second. I'm just conscious of time because I want to touch on chapter 11 very quickly. Oh, yep, we can do this bit. Okay. Okay, now I'm not going to read this. We're not going to read this out for the sake of time, but if we look at Leviticus, okay, so in verses 12 to 15, we see Moses continue to instruct Aaron and his sons to follow through with the eating of the offerings. But if we jump down to verse 16 to 20, actually, you know what? Let's quickly read this out. So I'm going to get Dan. Do you mind reading Leviticus 10, 16 to 20, please?
Okay, 10, 16 to 20.
Yes, thank you.
Then Moses made careful inquiry about the goat of the sin offering, and there it was burnt up. And he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, the son of Aaron, who were left, saying, why have you not eaten the sin offering in a holy place, since it is most holy, and God has given it to you to bear the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before the Lord? So, see, its blood was not brought inside the holy place. Indeed, you should have eaten it in a holy place, as I commanded. And Aaron said to Moses, look, this day they have offered their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, and such things have befallen me. If I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been accepted in the sight of the Lord? So when Moses heard that, he was content.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so again, you know, thinking about this scene, the whole holy encounter we've just seen, and Aaron's sons being, well, they didn't get burnt to a crisp by the fire, but you know what I'm saying, the nostrils, and they were there. And, you know, Moses gave very clear instructions to Aaron that he wasn't to mourn, and we see the sin and the sin offering was burnt complete, which means Aaron and his remaining sons, the other priests, had to consume part of the sacrifice, were meant to consume part of the sacrifice. And I wonder if this was an oversight by Aaron or internally what he must be thinking. And you actually see Moses actually become angry with Aaron and his sons in verse 16. But Aaron was the one that actually responded in the end, wasn't he? So, and it's interesting, actually. when I read Rashi, he was actually saying it was based on 3 goat sin offerings. 2 were done and 1 wasn't. So someone can go away and have a little bit more fleshing out with that if they like, but that was something interesting read I found there. So do you remember the process of the sin offering, guys, and what the priests were, why the priests were to take part of this? Do you guys remember that? Okay, so, well, as we know, the burnt offerings were always burnt complete. There was no partition they weren't meant to partake in it. But when we read in verse 17, we know that the sin offering was obviously indeed for the congregation. And we also know that from previous studies that, and with the sin offering, that the consumption or part of the sin offering from the priest was necessary for them to bear the iniquity of the congregation. So that's why it was important that they actually consumed it, and they didn't in this situation. And of course, we see that the blood was also not placed in the holy place in verse 18. And, why didn't this happen? Well, looking at the Talmud, we see in Zephachim 101a, they say that it was due to acute mourning from Aaron. I'm not going to read all the details there, but it's due to the acute mourning. And so we see that even though they weren't meant to participate in the physical, you could say, ceremonial mourning process, I guess you could say that was the outworking of someone dying, that physicalness. You will still, I look at it and I still see that they were mourning in their head, weren't they? I mean, it's inevitable you will, we're human, we're human flesh. And of course, with a conscience, they felt that when they were not in the right position to be able to take or consume that sin offering, as you can see with what Aaron said. And I think that's a huge thing for Aaron to stand up and say, and yet at the same time you can see why. He knew within himself that it wasn't appropriate for him to consume the offering. Then of course he was rebuked. But Moses, who speaks on behalf of the Lord, eventually saw the point he was making. And you see, this offering was actually to be eaten with rejoicing. And with the state of mind that Aaron was in, he was not in that place of rejoicing. And that's why he says, in my current state of bereavement, I'm doing this out of respect. Aaron was willing to do his duty in the tabernacle, but he was not willing to fake a spirit of religious joy before the Lord when he wasn't there. And I actually think it shows also God's grace on the situation, don't you think? Yeah. So let's move to chapter 11, and it's all about kosher. So, and this is obviously for those that don't know, but I'm sure you all do know, it's about the eating of clean or unclean food. So what do you guys know about kosher? I've said some of it already, but I would be interested to hear some of your thoughts on it.
Well, there's a distinction between land animals and sea animals.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go to sea because it's easy. If they've got scales and fins, they're clean.
Yep.
And if they haven't got either, they're not. But in real terms, anything with scales has fins. So it was actually a duplication to add colour to the Torah.
Oh, a duplication to add colour to the Torah. There you go.
Wasn't it mostly you should not eat animals that chew the cud or have a separate hoof?
Yeah, perfect. Anyone else like to input?
I spoke to my dad last night, and he'd gone out fishing in WA and caught pink snapper and tuna. But it was just interesting that he said these particular fish have beautiful big scales, and he said the better the scales, the bigger the scales, the better eating the fish. But obviously the fish with scales the people of Israel were commanded to eat, not that which was without scales.
Yeah. Interesting. I love it how, and Dan, you just sort of hit on the head, you just apply, like your dad's talking to you about that, and you're probably thinking about the clean and the unclean food. He's saying, I do the same thing. It's like, and you may not even bring it up with them, but you're just talking about it right in your own head. So that's cool. All right. So I was listening to a rabbi the other day, and he said the following. So this is just his thoughts. And he said, there's an old expression based on the Torah, and it says, you are what you eat, meaning that the intellect and emotion of man is a direct outgrowth of the intake. We also eat these refined foods so that we think and feel in a refined manner. Most of it is connected to kosher, both literally and especially spiritually. If we ingest non-kosher food, it affects the sensitivity of the desensitization, excuse my way of saying that, of one's spiritual antennas, meaning the closing up of the spiritual arteries of the heart and mind to the matters of godliness. So I just thought that was a really interesting way, insightful way of elaborating more as to why Jews eat kosher food as well. But what does kosher mean?
You've been listening to Rabbi Gordon, haven't you?
I listen to everyone. I thought Beth particularly would acknowledge that. Okay, so what does kosher mean? Like in its simplest form, do we guys know?
I'm not sure, Kelly, but I would say clean.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it means fit. So it's just a three-letter word that just means it's fit. So the laws of kosher define the foods that are fit for consumption for the Jews. So kosher has nothing to do with health. And it isn't a health diet. It's nothing to do with GMO or gluten-free or organic or non-organic. You know, Coke, for example, is actually kosher. But is it good for you? I'll let you decide. It's good for cleaning various things. And I'm sure I could rattle off actually heaps of food that you go, but it may not be good for you, but that doesn't matter with kosher in terms of it's not a health diet. So some of the rabbis actually do mention of health reasons. However, none of what I've mentioned, of course, is a reason to keep kosher. Rather, we keep kosher because it is the will of the Creator, and God wants us to be holy. So to be holy, remember, is to be set apart. So we see this clearly at the end of chapter 11 in verse 44 and 45. And Israel was intended to be the nation that is set apart to the world. And that this is one of the ways this is done. So to the Jew, holiness is not just confined to holy places and times and outside the everyday. Rather, life in its totality is a sacred endeavor. So even the seemingly mundane activity of eating is a godly act and a uniquely Jewish experience. Now, I am not going to get someone to read. This is a big chapter, and we have 12 minutes left. So I feel like we'll just keep going. I think everyone is pretty clear if you've read it anyway. If not, I'm sure you have an understanding what the verses are. The first part of the chapter simply goes through the clean and unclean food. And the second part pretty much goes through what happens if it's in a vessel and an animal, goes in it and this, that, the other, and what to do. And then the last bit literally tells you why you are to keep kosher, because to be holy. And I think, well, what better way to be holy before the Lord? Okay, so it's interesting in the first verse when we look at it, just quickly, it says, yeah. Is someone saying, yeah. Hello, Joy.
I've heard there is much merit. I've heard there is much health benefit from not eating the creepy crawlies on the bottom of the ocean.
Yes, look.
Were you saying not eating some of these things?
No. What I'm saying is that the primary reason why kosher is just because it's told us to be holy. That God says, do it because I'm holy. I want you to be holy and pure. It's nothing to do. It may get benefits out of it, but that's not the sole purpose.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, when God gives this commandment, it's not like they had the science to know what
True.
to eat. You know, the bacterial, the algae, or, you know, crabs just eat bacteria, algae. The intention was, if you love me, obey my commandments. Whereas now we have all this science and all this amazing evidence that actually eating kosher is probably how our bodies were meant to be. That's Kelly's original intention statement.
Yeah, sorry if it came out a bit skewed. That wasn't my heart. It was just to say, because I know, and I know I've had conversations, and I've even thought the same thing, that, oh, it's good for you. And it's like, well, no, it's just because it's holy and it says it at the end of the chapter. That's the only thing. But thank you for your input, Joy. That's great. Okay, so in verse 2, it says, speak to the children of Israel. These are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. So it says here in the verse, these are the animals. So you might notice there's a verse, these are the animals. And this comes from the root word kahi. And that is alive and living. And so when we read Rashi's interpretation of this, he says, these are the animals. The word is an expression denoting life and is purposely used here in preference to express the following idea, because Israel cleave to the omnipresent and therefore deserve to remain in life. Thus taken to mean, this, O living nation, or nation that lives, is what we may eat. He therefore separated them from what is unclean and imposed commandments upon them, whilst to the other nations who do not cleave to him, he prohibited not. So what is he saying here? The words alive and living, that is for the, when we look at the words, these are the animals, the words alive and living is the core meaning behind these are the animals. So he is saying living nation, or a nation that lives, this is why you may eat and you will remain in life. I think that's beautiful. You know, it gives that solid reasoning behind it. And in the same way the verse was written shows, Rashi goes on to say that also that it is said that Moses held up each animal to show Israel what they could and couldn't eat. And I thought, I'd like that. I'd like to see the visual, the physical look of that. I don't know about you guys, but like, let's make it plain and simple. And that's what they did. So when we look at Leviticus 11 as a whole, and some of you guys have already touched on it, we see that in verse 3 to 8, it talks about the clean and unclean animals, permits the consumption of mammals that both chew, cut, and have a split hoof. These animals are characterized, you know, etc. I just want to jump down just to this side note. So in regards to pigs, we also find with regards to mammals, the Torah also does list some examples of animals that possess one clean characteristic but not another. And we see that with the pigs, the camel, the rock badger, and the hare. It might be slightly different said in your translation. So pig have a cloven foot, it does not bring up the cub. So a side note, so apparently in the times of Jesus, the Romans legions, that's the armies and that, would carry images of wild boar upon their standards and flags. The Hebrew term for pig and wild boar are the same. And the Romans considered pork to be cultural delicacy, and they consumed pork more than any other meat. And there's actually a lot of writings on this. So if you ever want to go and do your own study on it, it'd be quite interesting. And I thought it was interesting because of the relationship between the Jews and the Romans, that this was the case, you know. So it's interesting when we see the Old Testament and New Testament references to the pig and what it means, now having this understanding behind it. And at one point in the gospel, Yeshua speaks about the pig as a symbol for Rome. And you will see that in Matthew 7:6. And it says, "Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." And so it gives more meaning to this verse now, doesn't it? Having that little bit of background to how the Romans viewed pigs and boar and all that kind of stuff. And of course, we also see in Mark 5, where it talks about the unclean spirit, the legion goes into the herd of pigs, and it is because the spirit was of many, and that's what the word legion means, multiple. Now, I'm just going to pass through the other unclean and clean animals. We know what they are from verses 9 to 23. And I just wanted to flag with you. So most of us today would have been brought up to dismiss the dietary laws just in what we've been taught. And that's not to say I'm not bagging anyone out. I'm just saying that's how we've just been brought up. I was, But the question is, what would Jesus do? And what did Yeshua eat? Any thoughts on this?
He would have eaten a kosher diet. And
Perfectly on.
All of the fruits of Israel and the grains.
Yep. Perfect. And that is because God commanded it, isn't it? That's what he grew up. That's what he knew. That's what his father had told him to do. And it's interesting. The thing is, we know that he never renounced the biblical dietary laws. But what's interesting is that people tend to pull out that cheeky little verse in Mark 7:19. And this is a good example of the verse being read out of context in the chapter. Now, obviously, we've got 4 minutes left. So I'm going to quickly scoot through this. So we're not going to read it, but I ask and actually suggest that you actually go through and read this in your own time and do your own study on it, and I'll give you a summarized view of it. Because you actually have to read the whole chapter. We don't take one verse out and go, well, that's what he said, that's it. We need to read the whole chapter to go, where did it come from? Where are we going? Actually, what book was it in? What time was it in? Who wrote it? All that kind of stuff. So here we look at this chapter. And like I said, I'm going to very much summarize this because I've got a few other points I need to make. Is that what is he talking about in this chapter? Are we saying that Yeshua, the perfect spotless lamb, is going against his father's instructions that are found in Leviticus 11 and repeated again in Deuteronomy 14 to 21 to 21? I mean, could he be contradicting even his own words? But Jesus himself says in John 6:38, "For I've come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me." I mean, if he is going against his father's will, it means that he's going to go against the standards, the commandments that his father has established. So Jesus clearly says this in Matthew 5:17 to 19. It's the verses where it says that he didn't come to abolish, but rather fulfill and obey them. And he said, that verse. And there you go. And I said to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. So he didn't come to go against the law. So we see if he did come against a law, it would disqualify him as Yeshua of Israel. So what is he saying? Well, in Mark 7, we see the verse that everyone says is what they focus on. And then I need to go back to it. Hang on, 7:19. I'm actually going to read the last couple of verses.
Would you like me to read it, Cal?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Starting from, say, 17.
Yep.
When he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning the parable. So he said to them, "Are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart but his stomach and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods?" Mine has a footnote saying that was not in all translations, the last bit. Thus
perfect. So
purifying
that's
all
a key
foods.
part. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Cam. So what is the accusation here? So in the first 5 verses, we see that the Pharisees took issue with Yeshua's disciples because they ate bread, a clean food, with common hands. So this is why we need to read the whole chapter, and of course we don't have time today. A man-made tradition of the elders that went far beyond what the law of God required. So what was Yeshua's defense? Well, Yeshua was saying that washing the hands before breaking bread is a tradition, not a commandment. And he goes on to say in verse 8 that neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men. Okay, so what else is he saying? He was saying the moral defilement is greater danger than the ritual defilement. And we see this in Mark 7:21-23. And exactly what Cam said, depending on your translation of the Bible, you'll see a cheeky little ad there at the end. It says, "Thus he declared all foods clean." Yeah, that's not part of the original. So that's a key indicator that that actually was not what he was talking about. So I challenge you to go away and read that for yourselves and do your own study on it from the first verse to the end, and you'll gain that context on it. And the other thing is, I did actually want to look at Acts 10, but we are short on time. And I just want to, if anyone wants to talk about that, for those that are in the Zoom room and are in at church tomorrow, more than happy to talk to you about it then if you want some clarity on it. And that is the Peter's vision of the unclean food. And just, again, if you read the whole chapter, and think about Peter also. I thought this was a really interesting concept. You know, it says in there 3 times that Peter was asked by the Lord, rise, eat and kill, or rise, kill and eat. And it links back to 3 times when he denied Christ as well, which is a really, really strong link there. And he's like, I'm not going to fall into this temptation again. I'm not going to fall into, you know. So read the whole chapter and you'll actually see in verse, see if I can quickly find it here. It's at the end. So say from 23 onwards, you'll actually see God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. And that's really the crux of what the crux of this actual chapter is about. So go away and do your own study on it. And it talks about the key words there, I would say, is clean and unclean, which means unclean is unacceptable by God and common is unholy. So, again, if you want to talk about it more, I'm more than happy to, but we are short on time. What I will say is just at the end, what does kosher mean for us and how does it apply to Gentiles? Well, as believers in Yeshua, we have been grafted in. We've said this all along today, and we know it, that we've been grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. We have become spiritual sons and daughters of Israel. And it's not about the should and must, but the apostles did lay out in Acts 15 a minimum standard of what they forbade them to have, otherwise known as the Jerusalem Decree. And that is to restrain from having blood, meat sacrificed to idols, meat of strangled animals. And, it was a minimum standard of dietary laws, not a maximum standard. And they did encourage the Gentiles to come to synagogues to learn the Torah. And we also see this outline in the Didache. And for those that may not know what that is, it's a late century manual of instructions for Gentile believers that they believe originated from the Jewish believers, and that it gives the Gentiles an outline. So it was to encourage the Gentiles with as much of the dietary laws as they are able, but we need to remember that keeping kosher definitely does not earn salvation, and that's both Jew and Gentile. But we also must not look down at others that choose to do this. So I will leave that up to you. And I hope today has been insightful. There's been so many good things there. I've tried to give you a broad spectrum, a beautiful painting of this chapter. And anyway, I just thank God that we are able to read his word and to get all this goodness out of it. Anyway, I hope you all have a fantastic week. Like I said, Greg will be back on board next week. But other than that, I pray that you have a great day and I bless you all. See you later.
Thanks, Kelly.